You ask Opus 5 for a 2-line fix, and you get a doctoral thesis back. Over on the Claude Code subreddit, a thread called Opus 5 is insufferable has blown past 600 upvotes and 178 comments, and the author accuses the model of speaking an entirely new language they call unintelligiblish, and Reddit is the polite venue. On X, a developer posted nothing but a screenshot of the code comments Opus 5 generates, and it collected 9,700 likes. Even Boris Cherny, who is the creator of Claude Code, defended the model publicly and got called out for it. The top reply, "This response is part of the problem," sits at 2,043 likes. But while everyone screams, Anthropic quietly published a prompting guide dedicated to Opus 5, and almost nobody has opened it. So we ran the test nobody runs, reproduce the behaviors that drive people crazy, apply the guide line by line, and measure the gap on the same tasks. If you're new here, this is AI Dive, where we stay on top of AI so you can stay on your work. And in this video, we're going over the exact behaviors driving everyone crazy, reproduced live, what Anthropic's official guide actually recommends, and our before and after numbers on the same tasks. If you already know what changed in Opus 5, skip straight to the next chapter. For everyone else, 3 changes explain most of what's happening to you. The first, thinking is now on by default, which basically means the model reasons in a private block before every answer, and you can only turn it off at effort high or below. The second change, the context window moves to 1,000,000 tokens as the default and as the maximum. And the third is the big one. The effort parameter becomes the model's central dial, with 5 levels, low, medium, high, extra high, and max, and high sitting as the default. It decides how many tokens the model spends thinking, calling tools, and writing the answer. Concretely, at low effort, the model batches its tool calls, goes straight to work without a preamble, and confirms in 1 sentence. At high effort, it multiplies the calls, explains its plan before touching anything, and comments its changes in detail. And if that second description sounds exactly like your sessions, that's normal. You've probably been running on the default since day 1. The tone you're complaining about is that second column. Remember that word, effort, because half of the guide's settings go through it. And remember what it's not, a verbosity knob. We'll come back to that one, because that exact misunderstanding is filling the Reddit threads. One last piece of context. Anthropic openly states that Opus 5 writes longer answers than the previous Opus models, and that the model finishes tasks completely instead of leaving placeholders behind. So part of what you're living as a bug is a design choice, documented in black and white. And a documented choice is something you can reconfigure. The first behavior is the verbosity, and we didn't have to hunt for it. We asked Opus 5 to explain one function, a question whose answer fits in 2 sentences, and it came back with sections, subheadings, and warnings, in the tone of an audit report. And the top comment on the Reddit thread describes exactly that. Grand announcement sentences in the style of, "We just discovered something that changes everything," followed by 10 minutes of shell commands. The second behavior is the over-engineering. One user tells the story of a decisions file 7,000 lines long, and when they asked Opus 5 to clean it up, the model cut 200 lines, then added 600 fresh ones to document the deletions. We reproduced the pattern on a small feature. Our instance added a verification step nobody asked for, then wrote 20-line docstrings on top of 5-line functions. The third behavior is the scope creep. You ask for X, the model decides the real subject is Y, and it explains Y in 8 paragraphs. And there's a fourth grievance, sneakier than the other 3. The buried bad news. One commenter describes a wall of text explaining that everything went great, with an asterisk hidden 3/4 of the way down that admits something broke and contradicts everything above it. We lived that one too. Our instance announced a successful migration, and the line admitting the integration tests still need fixing sat in paragraph 7. So the rage is real, and it reproduces on demand. The question left is whether it's adjustable. The official guide is called Prompting Claude Opus 5. It sits in Anthropic's docs, and it answers the Reddit thread point by point. Its most important sentence fits on 1 line. Effort controls how much the model thinks, not how much it talks. Lowering the effort shrinks the thinking volume, but it doesn't reliably shorten the visible answer. So everyone dropping the effort to shut the model up is pulling the wrong lever. For length, the guide is explicit. You ask for it in plain words, with a conciseness instruction in the system prompt. And the guide says something nobody expects from Anthropic. You need to remove instructions from your prompts. If your instructions file says verify your work before answering, delete the line, because Opus 5 already checks itself, and lines like that trigger extra verification passes, which is basically tokens burned for nothing. Boris Cherny summed it up in 1 line. Opus 5 needs less prompting, not more. The rest of the guide covers the other grievances methodically, a section on agent narration, one on the length of generated files, one on scope framing, one on subagents, one on self-correction. And every section hands you the exact prompt block to copy, not a vague piece of advice. So the manual exists, it's free, and it contradicts the reflexes everyone carried over from the previous models. What's left is checking that it actually works. An effort sweep is simply running the same task at every effort level and comparing the tokens, the time, and the quality. The guide recommends redoing one if you kept your settings from an older model, so we ran ours on our reference task. It sounds heavy, but it's basically 4 runs and a comparison. In Claude Code, the effort is set 3 ways: a command inside the session, a flag at launch, or a key in your settings file, and that last one gives you a different default per project if your repos don't share the same needs. So we launched the same bug fix at low, medium, high, and extra high in 4 clean sessions. Our result? Low and medium produced an equivalent fix for a fraction of high's tokens, which is exactly what the guide announces when it tells you to use those levels liberally as your main cost control. At extra high, the model explored more files and armored the edge cases, which is useful on a heavy refactor and overkill on a bug that takes 1 line. One API detail worth knowing before you script this: at extra high and max, the thinking can't be turned off anymore, and the request returns a 400 error if you try. If AI Dive keeps you ahead of AI, subscribe and hit the bell so the next dive lands in your feed. The most profitable use of the sweep is code review. Anthropic claims the review accuracy of Opus 5 holds at the lower effort levels, which allows a fast, cheap pass at commit time and a deep pass later. We tested that on one of our diffs. The low pass found the same 2 real bugs the extra high pass found, for about 1/5 of the tokens. So the first setting that changes your bill is choosing the effort per task type, instead of leaving everything on the default, low or medium for the daily work and the reviews, extra high for the big jobs. But the verbosity didn't move by a single word, exactly as predicted. Since the effort won't shorten the answers, the length is set by instruction, and where you put that instruction matters as much as what it says. Another user on the Claude Code subreddit spent days testing this, and their first finding matches ours. The built-in concise output style only cuts the output by about 6%. What worked for them is putting one real conciseness instruction in the output style slot, and nowhere else. The same sentence as a hook or as a rule in the instructions file changed nothing. So we built ours from the official guide's wording: short, focused answers, reduced warnings, a high-level summary unless the details are requested. On our reference task, the answer went from a report in 5 sections to 1 paragraph and a list of modified files. And the guide adds 2 sister instructions we copied as they are. One for the agent narration, which frames when the model gets to comment on what it's doing, and one for files written to disk, because the generated reports and markdown files bloat too. And for your rules that never seem to fire, the same Reddit post gives the criterion. A rule has to name a recognizable moment and a concrete action. Keep the changelog up to date never triggers. When you modify a file in the source folder, add a line to the changelog in the same commit that one triggers. There's one verbal tick left that these blocks don't cover, the narrated self-correction. Opus 5 loves announcing that it's fixing a previous sentence, even when the fix changes nothing for you, and the guide has a dedicated instruction for it. Only flag a correction if the error would change your code or your decisions, and fix the rest silently. Since that line entered our config, the fake mea culpas have disappeared from our sessions. So the verbosity does get tamed, just not with a switch, with 4 prompt blocks placed in the right slots. Grievance number 2, the over-engineering, is fixed by removing text, not adding it. That's the counterintuitive part. The whole fix is a deletion. We started by purging every verification request from our prompts, exactly as the guide orders, and the extra verification loop disappeared with them. Then, for the scope, the guide ships a framing instruction we pasted as is. Deliver what was asked at the scope intended. Flag it in 1 sentence if a better approach exists, and keep going on the requested task instead of quietly transforming it. On the feature that had triggered our 20-line docstrings, we replayed the exact same request with that framing. The diff dropped from 9 files touched to 3, with no parasite verification step. 2 settings from the same family deserve a line each. For code review, stop writing only report the serious problems. Opus 5 takes that literally and under-reports, so ask for everything and filter in a second pass. And if the model launches subagents at the slightest excuse, that's documented too. Opus 5 delegates more readily than its predecessors, and every subagent multiplies the cost. The guide gives you an instruction that reserves delegation for the big, genuinely parallel jobs, and since version 2.1.217, Claude Code also exposes 2 environment variables that hard cap the spawn depth and the number of agents running at once. By default, those caps sit at 3 levels of depth and 20 simultaneous agents, which explains how a session can spiral that far without ever asking your opinion. So the over-engineering isn't a fate of the model, it's largely your old prompts turning against you. Now, the limit, and it's a sharp one. The guide fixes the shape of what Opus 5 says, not what it decides to do. Part of the thread's rants describes something else than verbosity. A model that acknowledges an explicit constraint, promises to respect it, then does the opposite from the first turn. That grievance has no section in the guide, and none of our prompt blocks made it disappear. We saw it once during our tests, an explicit constraint on an API not to touch, acknowledged in the answer, then bypassed 2 turns later. Once across a week of sessions is far from the shipwreck some rants describe, but it's the kind of error no setting excuses when it lands on production code. You also have to count the entry cost. The sweep burns real tokens. Our 4 test sessions ate the equivalent of a big day of work on a $20 plan, and one user in the thread reports that the biggest max plan barely survives a weekend at high effort. And none of these settings are portable. The output style, the scope framing, and the sub-agent caps all live in your config. So every machine and every project has to be tuned again. So if your grief is the noise, the guide fixes it. But if your grief is a model that does whatever it wants, the guide won't save you. And the most upvoted comment of the thread after the rant itself is still, go back to the previous Opus, which says a lot. So should you tame Opus 5 or flee it? For us, 20 minutes of settings were enough. The effort chosen per task type instead of the default, one conciseness instruction in the output style slot, the guide's scope framing in the system prompt, and the verification requests deleted from our old files. And on our reference task, the before and after adds up in 3 numbers, an answer 5 times shorter, a diff that drops from 9 files to 3, and reviews at 1/5 of the cost without changing model or plan. If your complaints are the verbosity and the over-engineering, run this tuning before you change models. Everything is documented, and the gap shows from the very first diff. We replayed the reference task one last time to be sure, and got a short answer and a clean diff. But if your problem is a model that ignores your constraints from the first turn, no prompt in the guide repairs that. Keep your sensitive tasks on a model that obeys you, and come back to test Opus 5 at the next update. That's the dive. If this earned a minute of your day, the super thanks button below keeps them coming. Subscribe and hit the bell so the next one reaches you. See you in the next one.